How many magazines can claim to influence how world leaders are picked? Well, the Spectator certainly can.
And the torch will finally be passed to a new Conservative leader.
As one of the oldest and most established UK publications around. It started life as a collection of magazines in 1711, over 300 years ago, with early readers including founding father Benjamin Franklin. Today, it's a political stronghold with past editors, including Nigel Lawson and Boris Johnson. The magazine has also ridden the wave of digital evolution over the last decade. That's prompted its subscriber numbers to boom alongside its valuation, now valued at a hefty 100 million by some estimates. How and why has this happened? We sat down with the editor, Fraser Nelson.
It feels as an editor that I've lived through like 40 years worth of politics.
He tried a few different jobs before settling on journalism, including applying for the RAF and becoming a professional piano player. When the Barclay brothers purchased The Spectator,
The Barclay brothers have bought The Spectator magazine.
Fraser joined the ranks before becoming editor in 2009 under Andrew Neil's chairmanship. Perhaps most notably, in those 15 years, Fraser has overhauled the magazine's recruitment processes by making CVs blind.
I also noticed in journalism another trend that if you see two people with the same surname, the odds are that they're probably related.
They now allow anyone from any walk of life, at any age, a chance to apply to its internship scheme.
Either you've got it or you haven't. There's something inside you, I think.
This innovative programme has led to remarkable results as we explore on this episode of Jimmy's Jobs of the Future, recorded in the heart of Westminster at the Spectator magazine headquarters on Old Queen Street.
So what's the origin story behind why you decided to use blind applications for interns?
Mainly my own travails trying to get into journalism. When I applied for internships, I found it very difficult. I didn't know anybody in London. I'm not from that kind of background. And in the rare moments I did manage to get an internship, you'd find the other interns were invariably the well-connected, were the nieces and nephews of the great and the good. And that always bugged me, that I had to write about sort of 10, 15, 20 application letters for any kind of response. And I also noticed in journalism another trend that if you see two people with the same surname, the odds are that they're probably related. Now, that's not necessarily because of nepotism, but because the children, obviously, they're told the ropes. It's like a secret garden, and you have to know the way in. Now, when I became editor of this small magazine, I wasn't just the editor. I had incredible latitude over everything. I've got complete freedom, including the way that we do internships. So I set up a new system where I banned sort of informal internships. So nobody was able to take on a friend, etc. And then we did initially, we did aptitude tests. Now, the funny thing about journalism is that you don't need a degree. There are very few formal qualifications. I mean, I did journalism postgrad. I've got NCTJ qualification, but that's just for reporting. Either you've got it or you haven't. There's something inside you, I think. And that doesn't really cut across class divisions. It doesn't cross educational divisions. You can see some of the best journalists in the world, like Frank Johnson, the former editor of The Spectator, had hardly any formal education, yet one of the greatest writers there was. So what we would do is we would say, okay, here are 5 or 6 tasks. So a research task, or write a headline, or write a blog, and let's see what happens. And we took it to aptitude. Now, when I first started doing that, I expected a greater array of people leaving university, as it were. Because in my mind's eye, I always imagined your aspirant journalist to be somebody who was about sort of 21 years old, about to finish it, wanting to go into the... But then when we saw the applications, we saw 2 things that I never expected. One was people who are career changers. So we're talking 27, 30 years old, sometimes even 33, who would be taking 2 weeks off work to do our internship because they felt that their life were going on a certain tram rail. And here was a very rare opportunity to go somewhere else. Because we didn't look at anybody's CV, we just took the answers on equality. And there's a great number of people who were willing to start at the bottom in a new career for a chance just to get in a fresh start. So you had the career changers, then you had the difference in age. I remember I once met a 48-year-old woman who came to one of our events, and she was saying, by the way, I'm your intern next week, just so you don't get a shock. And of course, I mean, I'm 50, she doesn't look very old to me, but this was Catherine Forster, her name was. And she had somebody, she'd never really worked. She was a sort of stay-at-home mum, but her kids were at a certain age where she felt, well, why shouldn't I roll the dice and see if I can try my hand at journalism? And she was fantastic. She went off to the Sunday Times, and now she's a reporter at GB News. And time and time again, we kept getting the sort of diversity that I would never really have thought to ask for. But the whole point of this scheme is that you're not asking for diversity. You're not playing a who's who game. You don't want X many people for rich backgrounds, poor backgrounds, this skin colour, that kind of religious outlook. You are hoping to get people from different walks of life, because journalism is about life. How are you really supposed to understand the world if you're only ever recruiting one sort of person? And now this scheme really started getting us great results. And to my surprise, we didn't just got interns, we were playing for keeps. And before too long, this became the way that we recruited. Now, we also, and we did work with the Social Mobility Foundation for, they were basically work experience as opposed to internships.
Yeah.
So the SMF kids, they're typically people who are before university, and that's something different. They don't really want to become journalists. But the internships, they did. And then there was one year that I noticed that there was this, I'd be rude of me to name him, there was a son of a very famous journalist who was our best intern of the year. And I noticed some people were saying, oh, you're only hiring him because he's so-and-so's son. Oh, no, he just happened to be brilliant.
Yeah.
So that was what made me decide, okay, we're going to delete the names as well. So from that year, I just finished watching Money Heist on Netflix, where all the gangsters are given city names like Paris, Tokyo. I thought, okay, that's a great idea. So we give all of our interns city names. So all the applications now are coming with the test and then the city name. So therefore, no indication of gender, no indication of ethnicity or nationality. It's all just pure aptitude. Now that was mainly, to be honest, it was inspired. So if somebody does happen to be to the manor born or the son of somebody famous, then that doesn't count against them.
Yeah.
The overall principle is that you play the hand you're dealt in life. And if you happen to be born in a rich family, if it doesn't make you a bad person, if you happen to be born the son of a brilliant writer, quite often that can with Kingsley and Martin Amis, and there's the history is full of great writers who shouldn't be discriminated against just because of who their dad is. So we started to do it that way, and then and that led to all sorts of other very unusual people coming through our doors, as well as people you might regard as very usual. So you do get people with a double first in Oxford, and they tend to be disproportionately represented. But you'd hope so, because Oxford and Cambridge are our best universities. If they're doing their job, they should be getting the best and the brightest. Now, of course, it's not perfect, but it's no surprise that you would get overrepresented in that. So we got this mix, if you like, and that mix steadily came to build the Spectator staff, and in doing so, reshape the face and the voice of Spectator.
And half of your newsroom, you estimate, sort of started out on the intern programme at various different guises.
Yeah, about that now, yeah. And doing various things as well. I mean, I think all of the broadcast department, for example.
Because the internship breaks down across 4 different areas, right? Magazine, political mischief, broadcast, and data and research, which is almost an example of how journalism is changing through the ages, perhaps.
Yeah, data and research is my own sort of personal passion. I do quite a lot of that. In the room next to us here, we've got 4 researchers. They work on fact-checking and data analysis. You won't get many publications where that proportion of staff are working on fact-checking. But they're very different skills. I mean, you mentioned earlier on that I tried to join the RAF, which I did. But when you join the RAF, everybody assumes you want to be a pilot. But there's so many things you can do at the military. You can be an engineer, you can be a cook, you can be an administrator. And it's the same thing with journalism. You can be drawn to journalism without wanting to see your name in lights. Most people here at The Spectator are sub-editors. They commission, they will work out other people's copy, but they won't really write themselves. We also noticed that the younger generation were getting increasingly drawn to broadcast. So we wanted people from different skill set. And Cindy Yu, our head of broadcast, she when she joined us, she was just incredibly fast at doing these things, and now she's built her whole team from interns who wanted to choose the broadcast specialism. And now for this year, we're going to start our marketing department want the same thing, so they want this as well. And it makes perfect sense to me, of course, because it's a great way of finding talent in unexpected areas. And I think it really works for retention. We pride ourselves in the Spectator in almost never losing anybody. And that is partly because I think people are proud to belong to a team where you're all here on merit.
Yeah.
Take Svetlana Murnets. So she came to us as a Ukrainian refugee. She knew absolutely nobody in Britain. She applied in the internship scheme, and it just so happens that she was in Kiev. She was an award-winning journalist there. But she was told by the job seekers when she came to get a job here, she was told, look, immigrants don't get hired as journalists in Britain, forget it. And when she told me that story, I was kind of quite shocked. But then I thought to myself, actually, they're right. Looking around the television, looking around the newspapers, how many people do you know who are immigrants? Immigrants are 20% of the workforce in Britain. That's a lot. I reckon they're about 0.2% of journalists. And that is not, I don't think, because there aren't talented immigrants who want to do it. I just think that as an industry, we make ourselves very, very difficult to get through. If you go to Australia and America, you'll see Brits there.
Yeah.
You just won't see the same. You know, I was listening to Paul Gambergini on Radio 2 yesterday, and even now, Paul Gambergini jumps out because here's an accent which is not a British accent on the British media. So one of the things that we did was just simply that as a leveler. So now we've got 2 Americans, a Ukrainian, and a Lithuanian on our staff.
And why do you think that's the case first? Why do you think the British media is bad at recruiting immigrants and just generally diverse recruitment?
I think for a couple of reasons. One reason I'd add tonight is who wants to become a journalist. I found over the years that journalism is quite scores very highly in middle-class white culture. It doesn't score as highly, for example, in Chinese culture. If you want to be a journalist now, you're going to go on to start in a pretty low-paid position. Now, good luck to you telling your Indian parent or your Chinese tiger mum that you're going to be farting about in 28 grand a year in a career which doesn't really promise much in the way of riches or longevity. Now, of course, if you've come from a certain sort of background, you love the idea of being a journalist, of leading this sort of romantic, semi-charmed life of the mind. But that doesn't always impact in other cultures. So I think one of the reasons that journalism is still disproportionately white is simply when you look at the applications, the people this profession draws do come from that background. Now, another part of that is because the salaries are so low. The salaries are appalling in journalism. I started at the Times on £24,000 in the mid-90s. That was my starting salary. There are people right now entering journalism paid £24,000.
Yeah.
Now, how are you supposed to live in the city on that figure? I just don't know. But I've looked into this, and one of the reasons is parental subsidy. You get people from wealthy families who want to become a journalist, their parents want them to become a journalist, and they are basically willing to subsidise their kid in so doing. Now, again, you try telling somebody from a poorer background or an immigrant background where they're going to be working for significantly less than they can be getting in pretty much any other job. That it's a harder sell. So I think that because the low salaries, in a way, block us off to people who aren't willing to take a pay cut to be a journalist, and there's a cultural aspect there. And then I still think journalism is very sort of clubby in a way. You know, it's quite there's lots of who you know. Even to this day, if you look at who gets internships, there's lots of connections. Journalism trades on connections. You want a contact to give you information. You want to be able to get information. Say your very good contact says, okay, I tell you what, I've got a daughter here. Why don't you take her in for a week or two? You think, okay, this guy's a good contact. I'll take the trade. Yeah. Now, in a way, you can see why that's a moralistic thing to do. But another way, you can see why this completely pollutes the intake of journalism. So I think journalism is unusual and that the work experience positions are the way into it.
Yeah.
And yet nobody has properly stopped to monitor How are these given out? To whom are they given out? To what extent are they a friend of friends? And I think with the first publication to put a complete ban on informal internships or nepotistic arrangements, and other publications could do it, but I'm not aware of anybody else that has done it. So I think because internships, quite often work experience, it isn't paid. And there's a view there, if it's not paid, then it doesn't really matter who gets it. You've actually seen, sometimes you see internships for raffle. You can go to a charity auction. You can see, whereas we have a rival magazine that I won't mention that did raffle off one. Now, who's going to win that raffle? Obviously, the daughter of somebody incredibly rich. There's another publication that will only take interns from a certain Oxford college. Now, this is not how you improve diversity in the media. So I think that journalism has, to a part extent, has accepted the subsidy from middle-class parents in the form of low salaries. And also, publications do not take seriously internships as a route of finding the journalists of tomorrow.
You have been able to increase subscriber growth and revenues via that.
Well, this is actually linked to our internship scheme. Has been somebody else's idea. Not one of these things has been my idea. They've all been things that this incredible team of innovators I've got around me have come up with. So we have got this a culture of innovation. The motto we've got here is to ask for forgiveness, not permission. So to do something quickly, see if it works, and if it doesn't, so what? So this all happened by accident. Our podcasts, we came out years ago when the intern Sebastian Payne, he was now standing to be a Tory MP, but he was saying, look, podcasts are easy, guys. You can just get some stuff from eBay, upload it on iTunes, problem solved. Now, we had absolutely no idea if that was true or not, but Seb set it up, and here we are. That was the beginning of our broadcast division. We did Spectator TV with some cameras that I bought on eBay. We didn't think it would necessarily work, but it's doing pretty well so far. So you need, and I think it helps to have young journalists who come in, who start, because I think the way people see journalism is changing.
Yeah.
My generation, we see it as a print magazine or a print newspaper. The ones signing up to the Spectator now, to them, the Spectator is a podcast, or it is a TV, or it is an email, or it is all of these things. And it can be quite difficult to not to become wedded to one medium and to work out that the Spectator's values are sort of eternal, but can be expressed in all sorts of platforms. But all the innovations have happened because people a lot younger than me have come up with these ideas.
But the economics of it are interesting in the sense of The Economist has now put a lot of its podcasts behind paywalls, whereas you at the moment haven't done that, right? And the only thing you can pretty much buy, I think, is the magazine, right?
Yes, we regard a podcast as a marketing tool. We're a small magazine. I mean, sure, we're selling a lot more than we used to, but we're tiny compared to most newspapers, other than The Guardian, of course. We need people to... We've got a negative perception to overcome, that the Spectator is about Tory politics.
Yeah.
Now, we cover Tory politics very well. We cover politics very well. We probably do it better than anybody. And as a result, we tend to become known for it. The last time I was on Laura Kunsberg's show, she introduced me as the editor of something she called the Tory Bible. I know I could have run off the set at that stage. It was such a demeaning expression for the Spectator. And yes, of course, we do have a close politics. Well, look at the magazine. We do about 60 articles in each issue, about 5 or 6 of them are about politics. But nonetheless, we need to overcome this perception that there's a very small audience for Westminster politics in this country. The podcasts help us talk about all kinds of things. I mean, Cindy Yu, one of our interns, she was a store manager in Lidl in Balham before she joined us. She now's got a podcast called Chinese Whispers, where she is one of the very few British Chinese journalists working in this country, and she's explaining China to a whole new audience. You wouldn't really have associated The Spectator for that kind of thing. We have Katie Bowles doing an interview series, Women with Balls. So we use these things to try to reach potential subscribers, to get them engaged with us, to understand that although we do politics very well, what we really do is sort of high caliber comment, interesting discussions, and most of all, diversity of opinion.
I enjoyed the phrase that you've used in the past, which is that you are in bed with the Conservative Party, but you're trying to pull the sheets off.
Yes, that's exactly what we intend to do, but pull the sheets off. I think it was the New York Times that have ever said that. And that's our job, really. If you know, upstairs, we've got every cover we've done for the last 4 years. We cover the wall with these just to make sure we don't repeat themes. And when you look at it, we've given them all hell. Every single Tory leader, we really have. So this is the idea of us somehow being cheerleaders for this lot is a bit far-fetched.
But why do you think politics has such a kind of reach, as it were, particularly in the kind of new age of social media and so on? Because I guess that's part of what's happened, is that Spectator doesn't just sit on a newsstand anymore. You know, it like you say, it sits in your sort of podcast downloads, it sits on your various social media feeds. Why does politics have so much more reach than anything else, do you think?
Well, I think we've happened to live through a political moment where it has been crazier than the most bizarre Game of Thrones plot. It has been stranger than fiction for about 10 years. And I would place the beginning of what I call the political crazy period on the Scottish referendum in 2014. Now, that should have been a slam dunk for the Unionists, but it wasn't. Scotland came within a whisker of voting for independence. And then after that, I think the balance started to shift, and then really unexpected things started to happen. So then you ended up with the Tories actually winning a majority in 2015. Nobody expected that, not least David Cameron. And then had to carry out his referendum promise, which he never thought he'd be held to. Then the referendum against all odds turned out for Brexit, and then Trump starts to win, and all of a sudden, politics ceases to become predictable. The sort of thing you can look at an opinion poll and work out what the next 3 or 4 years are going to do. It becomes an arena where these larger-than-life, sort of semi-crazy figures like Trump and Boris Johnson can just swoop into. And all of a sudden it matters. It matters whether or not we're in the European Union. It matters whether or not we're about to... Let's take COVID, for example. Again, everybody... That wasn't just politics. That was everybody's life. And politics was dictating how many times you could go outside or not. So I think we've lived through... Sajid Javid, when he stood down recently as an MP, he made the point that feels like he's lived through sort of 4 political decades because the pace of change has been so big. He's done like more jobs than anybody since Churchill, apparently, in terms of his cabinet jobs. I don't know what he means. It feels, as an editor, that I've lived through like 40 years worth of politics. It's better than living through a boring time.
It's good for the traders to say. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is about the job of editor. And you were somebody who was a Remainer, yet the Spectator came out for leave. The poster the magazine cover is on the wall of your office. How does that process and that decision happen?
It's a good question, and I didn't have an answer to this when the referendum started. I am, and I'm now, and always have been, a Europhile very strongly. I'm married to a Swede. I try to speak Swedish at home. My wife herself is a refugee from the Soviets. Our family is anyway. So the idea of Europe coming together post-Cold War was something which is quite personal for me, because it means my parents-in-law, who were on the run from the Soviets, can now go back to Prague. And a lot of that had emotional appeal. When I was young, I had like this Eurostar poster on the wall. It hadn't been built yet, but the idea that it was going to be, and that I was going to grow up in a world where Europe would be kind of your playground, as it were. You live or work anywhere you want. That was quite precious to me. So when Brexit came along, I thought, well, I couldn't go along with this. And then I thought, okay, that's... but then again, how do you reach that decision? Who to bag? So throughout the campaign, we covered both sides equally. Now, people don't believe that because they now see the Spectator as, because of our famous Brexit butterfly cover, associating us very much with Brexit. But the week before Brexit, I wrote an editorial saying, okay, next week we're going to come out one way or another in the referendum. We've given you both sides so far. We've given you Matthew Paris and Hugo Rifkind on the Remain side and a few others, and now we're going to make our choice. Now, the way that kind of happened organically. So looking around, you had a few of our columnists came to back Brexit. Charles Moore did. For me, a big moment when James Forsyth, the political editor, he backed Brexit, which at the time I thought was quite significant. He just said it sitting in this conference room, "Oh, this is useless." Now, I think Farage is right, and then you saw others take that. Charles Moore started to as well. Then you have Liner Shriver. Then you had a situation where most of our columnists were backing Brexit. Now, I don't like the idea of magazines dictating to readers what they should do. I don't like the idea. Magazines campaign for things they believe in, but I don't think that magazines should tell their readers to do one way or the other. Then again, you can't exactly dodge the question in the leader column, which of these two sides do you think is right? Now, for me, the big movement came when I thought David Cameron's renegotiation was going to work. To me, it was implausible that it wouldn't. I thought the EU could see that this was a country that was actually about to leave the EU. All he had to do was come back with some immigration controls, and I thought that would lead to an EU membership that would have more democratic consent. Because I had to accept by then that my own globalist tendencies were at odds with the rest of the country. You had something like 75% of the country against free movement. And when the EU didn't agree to compromise and didn't give Cameron his renegotiation, that was when I reluctantly concluded myself that it wasn't going to work, that there's only so long you can keep a country in a club for against his wishes, and that the EU was as intransigent as my Brexit friends had said. So I went from being, I'd say, sort of 60% Remainer to being about sort of 55-60% Brexiteer. In other words, it was always a dial for me. I could always see pluses and minuses, but the balance changed. For me personally, maybe as a columnist. But for a while, I did think to myself, I could be in a situation where the magazine was backing Brexit, but I personally, as a columnist, would be backing Remain. Yeah. That was plausible at one stage. But we all ended up on the same page eventually. And I think that everybody in this, it's not black and white. Everybody has a mixture of feelings, I think. Everybody was voting for one way or another with certain reservations. But I tell you one thing that didn't happen. Nobody said from up high, the Barclay brothers, Andrew Neil, anybody else, look, this is how we want you to go. The Barclay brothers actually asked me to go up and see them and tell them which way the magazine was going to vote. The first time they've ever done that in 14 years, asked me to go up to them. And what they said to me was that come here and just give us your reasons. Whatever it's going to be, it needs to be consistent with the magazine's policy. It needs to be well argued. And when they called me in to see them, I genuinely had no inkling what way they wanted me to jump. Now, I reckon that for that reason, I've had more freedom than any editor in London. Andrew Neil has been absolutely fantastic in guaranteeing that freedom, but to not even hint which way you wanted your publication to jump, I think showed incredible restraint on the Barclays side. People always assume here that editors are told what to do by their bosses, but this was a bottom-up process. And in the end, of course, part of me didn't like having to back one side because you know you're going to alienate probably a third of our readers. And we did. We lost a lot of readers. We gained some as well. But the moment you back one side and put the butterfly on the cover, you know, your emotions were so high that a good chunk of our readers would have thought, okay, to hell with you then. We've had enough.
How do you feel about Brexit now?
Now, I feel the same as I did back then. I think that Brexit was a valve, if you like, and it was basically for democratic consent. I don't think the free movement was going to be sustained, and I think it's helped to a significant achievement that Britain is the only country in Europe that doesn't have a populist party in Parliament. Yeah. So in France, you've got Le Pen, and in Italy, you've got all sorts of things going on. In Sweden, you've got the Sweden Democrats, part of the coalition. Everywhere you've had a kind of ugly sort of anti-immigrant party coming in through because the system wouldn't reform. Our system did reform. Yeah. And as a result, we're about to see a stable Conservative majority yield probably to a stable Labour majority. But that's how our democracy works. So from my perspective, I think leaving the EU was the right decision because too many people just wanted to go the other way. And I didn't really expect a land of milk and honey thereafter. And lots of things still pain me about it. And there's so much that I think is a shame that my kids will not have the right to live and work in an EU country as I did. Not that I availed myself of it, but it was a nice thing to do. I miss the sense of comity with the rest. I regard myself as a European. I'm perhaps one of the small number of people who do that. But I like to think that the Eurovision Song Contest still gives us something to unite around.
And talk to us about the job of editor and the process of the sort of different magazines, because basically we're recording on a Monday, you're taking the decision then about what's going to drop on people's doormats on the Friday, right? So
Saturday typically.
Yeah, Saturday. So that's quite a long,
Yeah.
particularly with all the political turbulence of the last few years, trying to predict 6 days out can be quite difficult. Just talk to us about the job of editor really and what it involves.
It involves so much. Right now, for my current job, I would say that journalism, editorial, is perhaps 40% of my job. The rest is management. But I would also... Now, looking back over my 14 years as editor, because let's remember, we could be sold to anybody any moment. I could be gone this time next week. So it does sort of make you have a certain sense of nostalgia. I don't regret all the time I spent in management, because I think that journalism now is in a battle for survival. You need a new business model. If you don't have a business model that works, you don't have journalism. Now, look, we've seen some of the greatest titles in Britain and America just collapse. And in my wall behind me, I've got the front page of The Scotsman there.
Yeah.
That's from the 1830s. That's where I used to work. That's there to remind me that no title, no matter how heroic or storied, has got a right to exist. The Scotsman now is a very, very bad way, tragically. So unless you constantly reinvent, unless you spend a lot of time dealing with your colleagues in the marketing department, in the commercial department, dealing with the tech side, and that, to me, these guys are the new para-journalists, if you want to call it that. Now, you mentioned earlier on that the Spectator first came out in 1711. Now, behind you in the wall, we've got one from 1711 there.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
And so that's a 320-year-old version of the Spectator. Now, at the bottom of it, it says, printed by Sam Buckley. That's on the reverse side. Sam Buckley invented the tech. He was able to have printing press back in 1711 that allowed a daily op-ed to get distributed amongst the coffee houses. Yeah. If it wasn't for Sam Buckley, there would never have been a Spectator. And I think that side of it is so important. We have doubled our subscriptions because we've innovated. We've changed the perception of a Spectator. We've changed our proposition from being a single print weekly to being multi-platform. So the bulk of my job has been in that area rather than deciding what the cover is going to be, which I also do. But I don't regret any. I would have liked to spend a lot more time on the editorial side because I find it more interesting. Bureaucratic battles are difficult, but by God, they are worth fighting, because that is the battleground on which journalism will stand and fall nowadays. I would say that right now, for a publication like The Spectator, the success is probably that ratio, 40% editorial, 60% tech.
Wow. Okay. And what are the changes in the 15 years? I mean, data must be a big one that we've touched on, but what are the big changes when it comes to the revenue model for the magazine?
Display advertising is collapsing. From a lot of publications, basically, we're vehicles for advertising. You get 60-70% of the revenue from it. Some of these magazines, we're now down to 5%. Wow. Very small. We love our advertisers. They enliven our magazine. They make it look better. But we could lose every single ad in the mag and the website and still turn a profit right now. So we looked to consumer revenue instead. In other words, we had faith that this almost 200-year-old magazine was able to get a 70-80% uplift in the revenue from newsstand and the revenue from subscribers. That if you manage to reinvent the product effectively, you'll be selling something very, very different. In a way, it's a bit misleading of me to say that our sales have doubled, because if you look at what we're selling 15 years ago versus what we're selling now, they're incomparable. We're selling a suite of editorial products now. Now, you mentioned the podcast. A lot of our subscribers listen to our podcast all the time. They don't pay for them, but it still ties them to it. They still feel as if they're bound to the Spectator. And it's that way of reaching out to people that we're doing. So we've reinvented the Spectator into becoming, to use unromantic language, a multi-platform product. And that has helped. And we've
words that wouldn't appear in the magazine, perhaps.
Well, I know. I hate using these phrases now. Platform content. They're so sort of technocratic and boring, but that is effectively what we're doing. Is my job as editor to make sure everything's cut from the same cloth. So the podcasts, the emails, the television show, everything has got the same brand. The branding is so consistent. You can get some publications where the website bears no relation really to the print product, and you can't have that. Everything needs to support it, and all of our products, to use an unromantic word, say the same thing: subscribe to Spectator. That's the message from our podcasts, from everything else. Subscribe, become part of the family, come to the debates, come and meet us. We do all of these things. So we're selling in the same way that Andrew Neil turned the Sunday Times into a multi-section newspaper. The Spectator has turned into a multi-platform publication. But our revenue has gone. What we've seen is display advertising go down quite a lot, but subscriber revenue go up quite a lot. In my opinion, we could double or treble the revenue again. We speak now when the Spectator is being sold. There's going to be the third reading of the Digital Markets Bill in Parliament. That will probably say that the Emiratis won't be able to have any stake in it. So I'm getting ready to give my pitch to a potential new owner. I'm looking for somebody who believes, as I do, I absolutely do, that we can double, treble in size again with enough vision, investment and determination and faith in good writing.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, that's what it's all about. Now, the medium through which you read it, that can change, but the journalism itself, there is always going to be a market. It's funny, before you came here, I was having a chat with Max, who also arrived in our internship scheme. He has moved recently from broadcast to print. And I was telling him how I think I envy him now, because journalism is being spread so thin with the newspapers that very few people get to do actual reporting.
Yeah.
So much of it now is just rewriting. But here I was telling him, you've got the freedom to go off to report, to find, to learn. There's a difference between journalism and writing. Writing's only part of it. Journalism is about finding things out, finding stories to tell, things that are true, and separating what's true from what's not. So that, I think the market for that has never been bigger. If you look at how much people are spending now on content, that's probably a record high. Now, the newspapers are struggling as a sort of a print delivery mechanism. They're certainly struggling to retain advertising when that's migrating online. But people will still pay money to be well informed, because where you get your news from has never been more important. And I think that as the internet proliferates and as social media flatulence proliferates, the more there is of nonsense, the greater the demand there will be for people to have writing where they can trust. And that's why we've got this very that extensive fact-checking team next door. Yeah. So when somebody reads a Spectator article, even if it's a little joke, they can be 100% sure that the facts are as stated, that we are not giving some little fake version of events. It's not sloppy. It's been checked and you can trust it. And it's my belief that that trust, once you've earned it, will keep a Spectator subscriber for quite some time. So I think that we're still at the foothills of what we can achieve.
That's very exciting. What do you think Andrew Neil saw in you to make you editor at 35? Because you said it was a job that you weren't particularly looking for, you didn't apply for. Like, it's quite a story.
It's such a good question. I would never have given me that job, really. Some little provincial guy from the Highlands who'd never edited anything before. Why would you put him in charge of the world's greatest magazine? I remember when he gave me that job, he, I had no idea about this. I had no idea my predecessor, Matthew Duncan, had just left, shall we say. And I remember just being numb, thinking, why does he think I can do it? And then I thought, hang on, I should just accept this, surely. But then I thought, hang on, do I think I can do this? And I didn't.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling almost physically sick, thinking of what I just agreed to do. I just heard myself saying yes when he offered the job. And I had absolutely no idea what to do next. The answer to your question is that Andrew Neil saw in me something I didn't see in myself. Now, looking back, I think I have done a reasonable job over this. And I think he saw that I could, but I didn't see.
But what did he see that you didn't see then, do you think?
I don't know. The strange thing is that he and I don't really talk about it in that way. I've worked with him for about 20 years, but he never really takes me aside and say, look, Fraser, these are your qualities. And And also the thing, I think that he sort of trusts my judgments. Andrew and I have lots of conversations. We even disagree and fall out a lot, but never about journalistic content. So I think that he thought that if I held true to my standards of what the Spectator could be, that would probably go in the right direction. He probably had more confidence. Remember, he has been an editor.
Yeah.
So he probably thought, it's easy, you get the hang of it. It's basically common sense. It's the, what did he call it once? The exhaustive and exhausting application of common sense. But then at the time, Andrew he also gave an interview after he hired me saying, he thought editors were like football managers. You can just fire them very easily if it don't work out. So maybe he didn't quite envisage a sort of 14-year stint. At the time, he said to me, look, you can do this for 4 years and then we can see how it goes. I used to be at the Times before that.
Yeah.
And the Times, I can say, I would not have prospered there. I did okay, but I was probably seen to be too provincial, really, to really get particularly high. There's no doubt that from the moment I started working with Andrew Neil, that he always saw something in me. And that was why I left the Times and worked for the Scotsman, because that was in a way a demotion, right, from a national to a local paper. Yeah. But Andrew had personally poached me. And I thought, well, here is one of Britain's greatest journalists who says that he sees something in me. And that's a compliment. Let's just follow this road and see where it ends.
Yeah, you talk about journalism being a bit like monkey vines.
That's my analogy of the career, that you can never really tell where you go. It's this is an analogy I give to my colleagues. They always look at me strangely as I give this analogy, but here goes. That you're sitting in a tree and you're a monkey wanting to get from one tree to another. Now, you can't cross the distance. All you can do is wait for a vine to swing past in the form of an unexpected job offer. And your decision is only, do I jump on this vine or do I not? If I do jump on the vine, I've got no real idea where it's going. All I can decide is it's time to leave this tree and take the next sort of gamble. And that's what I did throughout my career, starting off as a business journalist, going into retail, been writing about fashion for a while, and I just leapt in the dark and just kept leaping in the dark. I would never, ever have imagined that I would end up as the editor of a magazine or even writing about politics. I used to think that I didn't know nothing about politics to cut it, or that somebody from my sort of background, from my sort of family, would ever really have a job like this. I still feel a huge amount of imposter syndrome, shall we say.
Didn't John Cleese call you out on it at one point?
He did. And he called me a half-educated tenement Scot. And he is right, with the exception that we didn't have any tenements in the Highlands. But it was a very good phrase, because I am, by his standards, half-educated. He went to prep school and private school. I went to state school, and then when my parents were in the military, I got sent to this boarding school. But that was the moment. If you've got imposter syndrome, as a lot of people do, you live in fear of somebody blowing the whistle on you. Now, that night when John Cleese blew the whistle on me, it really cut me. I was in the pub with James Forsyth that evening when he did it. It was a Sunday evening, and I was trying to think of what to reply and tweeting it, but I thought, no, James, he's right. Everybody can see it. There's nothing I can say. But I sort of looked at myself, and I actually got a very nice email from Ricky Ross, who's the lead singer of Tick and Blue. He's a fellow Scot. And he sort of sent me a message saying, look, you should be proud of where you came from and who you are. And the funny thing is that to most Scots, I sound quite posh because I've got this sort of quasi-English accent. So people assume anyway that I'm a complete toff. So it was actually quite helpful to be attacked, to be what I am. And looking at it, I thought I would just lean into that. He's right, I am. And I like to think that in my time at The Spectator, I've made it easier for other people who are half-educated tenement Scots, or the Lithuanian or the Ukrainian equivalent of that, to walk into this secret garden and to have the great honour of having a front row of history, which is what journalism is.
One sort of final question that's just sort of popped in. Why do you think business media and business coverage is not bigger in the UK? In the United States, there's a real kind of industry around business media. There isn't so much of that here. Why is that the case?
Business journalism, which is how I started off, would usually be driven in towards basically company reports, annual half-year results. That information's got online very quickly. Yeah. If you've got shares in BP and you want to find out what BP's half-year statement was, you can find out. And you don't really buy a newspaper now to see what your share price is.
Yeah.
So, sorry. I thought I was right. No, that's right. You don't really buy a paper now to find out what the share price is. So in that role, the function of business journalists in Britain anyway have gone online. There's always a problem with financial journalism. Who are you writing for? I felt this a lot when I was a financial journalist. Are you writing for the personal investor? Are you writing for somebody who's in business, who wants to know more about the sector that you're in? Because those are two very different articles. Are you just somebody who's interested in the economy in general? So you need to have a paella of that sort of thing. But as you say, I mean, the Wall Street Journal does a fantastic, I think it's one of the best newspapers in the world.
Yeah.
And the quality of their analysis just keeps getting better. Now, I think in the UK, the specialist business media is taking a big share of the market. So Bloomberg is doing very well here now. And a lot of people will pay for them. The FT is doing fantastically well, and people put that on expenses. So this means that what you might call the consumer business media, like people selling to people who aren't getting their subscription paid for by somebody else, is struggling a little bit. And there's no real point really doing sort of company annual reports now. But it's something which I think is there to be revived. Certainly my pitch to the potential new owners of the Spectator is that the two things we should major on will be financial and economic coverage and foreign coverage, both huge areas of expansion. Business journalism was my first love. I still read the business pages every day. And I still think there are better stories to be told there than the ones that are currently being told. Business is an arena of personalities, of ambition, of feuds. It can be done properly. It can be as dramatic as the news stories. It just takes a lot of penetration.
Yeah.
If you're going to be a specialist, to actually get to know the chief execs is so difficult. To get past the PRs now is so difficult. So you need to have doyens, and there aren't that many doyens left. You've got Dominic Walsh at the Times, a few other specialists in the other subjects, but that is the problem. You need people covering the same beat to get to really know them. And banking is incredibly difficult. So you've got Mark Lyman, I think, who's incredibly good at what he does for Sky. And but other than that, I think the overall thinning out of journalism does mean the decline of specialists and the remaining journalists being spread a bit too thinly. But that is a trend which I firmly believe is there to be revived.
Well, that's great. That's finish on. Fraser, thank you very much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. It's been fascinating to hear it all.
It's a great pleasure to be on.
This